Carol, welcome to the program.
Hi, Glenn. How are you?
Good. Can you tell me what's going on in Argentina? First of all, the currency swap. We didn't make a loan to Argentina. We made a currency swap, which, I'm not really fond of the, what is it, the peso? Or what is their currency down in Argentina?
The Argentinian peso. You don't have a bunch of those in your vault with all of your gold and silver?
Nope, I don't. But we do now because we currency swapped, right?
Yes.
What's
so
that
this
mean?
this is not just giving money to Argentina for its government to spend. This is a financial support, which, by the way, currency swaps are not something that's unusual. We do this all the time with our allies, with Japan and Canada and whatnot. What is unusual in this particular situation is how it's affected. So basically what happened is that we gave the Argentinian central bank dollars. We took as collateral the peso, and that is meant to support the Argentinian peso and help to stabilize its currency.
Right.
And a couple of things of note. One is how it was done is interesting because normally when we do currency swaps and we have these lines, it's done through the Federal Reserve, our central bank. This time, it was not. It was done through the Treasury, through something called the ESF, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which is sort of a black box fund that allows Treasury to move quickly. You don't need Jay Powell. You don't need the approval of Congress in order to do these things.
And that's what it was built for, to stabilize currency in friendly countries.
And in the U.S., by the way.
Okay.
I can talk about the history and how we've used it in the U.S. before, but just to kind of get to the Argentinian point, we did this before the election to help stabilize things for Milei so that his government could win. But we didn't do this because we think Milei is a good guy, and we didn't do this because we think he has fabulous hair, even though we do think that. Yeah. The reason we did this is to secure our interests. Because you know who has been making a play in Argentina and throughout Latin America? Do you know who's had a long-term currency swap line and plays with Argentina? It's another country, and I'll give you all a hint, it rhymes with China. So China's influence all around the world with their Belt and Road initiatives where they're trying to dominate traditional infrastructure, digital infrastructure, financial infrastructure, we are trying to kick out their influence for national security reasons. Also, it just so happens that Argentina has the second largest reserve of lithium, as well as a smaller set of reserves of other rare earth elements that we need access to for our economic and national security. So that is what is underpinning all of this. It's because we don't want to be speaking Mandarin one day.
It is amazing how Donald Trump, people just don't understand this. Everything he's doing in South America, he is realigning the globe.
Yes.
He is doing his own version of America First Great Reset, and he's just doing it by himself. I mean, it's pretty incredible, isn't it, Carol?
It really is, and this is why I remember when we first had the discussion about Scott Bessent. Is he the right person for Treasury? And I eased everyone's concerns. Scott Bessent made his fortune on foreign currency exchange. There is nobody who understands the machinations of how you use currency to support countries and also, the impacts on political influence like Scott Bessent. So he has been side by side with President Trump, who has said, China's influence in South America is a national security issue. It's a priority. And, at this time when we're seeing a reset of the global financial order and you have China making this very big play at the same time when we really have a serious issue with our fiscal foundation, at a minimum, we need to make sure that we have our hemisphere, locked down before we can do anything else. And China has really been focused on making inroads in Latin America, and that is what this is all about. And it's not just about the currency swap. You talked about the importation of Argentinian beef. That is a piece of it as well. and we have to support U.S. ranchers. We have to make it easier for them to do business. We have to remove regulation. But this extra piece from Argentina, this is a long-term play. And I know that it's hard for people who are ranchers and who are dealing with this day to day. But this is a long-term play for national security, because otherwise it's not going to be Argentinian beef. It's going to be China that owns everything.
So I'm looking at Venezuela, what's happening there, and I don't think that's about drug running. I mean, it is about drug running, but it's not. It's about, again, taking control of this hemisphere. True or false?
Absolutely. I mean, and this isn't even you or I guessing about this. This has been a stated goal of the Trump administration. One of the great things about the Trump administration is Trump, whether he intends to or not, is incredibly transparent. He will tell you what is coming. He will tell you the things that he is going to do, even if they're couched in a different wrapper. You can look through that wrapper and see what that candy is on the inside, and he tells us about that candy. So he has been very clear that, in addition to the commodities and the rare earth elements and all of these things that are very plentiful in South America, and we need to make sure that we have within our allies' control so that we can have access to. You do not want China to have, military relationships and other very strong relationships within South America, because we know what that means long-term for the United States.
How is Trump doing overall?
So I think overall, I think he's doing quite well. I think from a foreign policy perspective, and I've said this during the last administration, it's funny, you think of him as a business guy. But from a foreign policy perspective, he's been absolutely just killing it, crushing it. He's been doing a great job in terms of securing the borders. Obviously, we'd like to see more deportations, but they're certainly trying and have some roadblocks. And I think from an economic standpoint, the fact that he has this long-term lens, even though some of the machinations I don't agree with, these are the important things. I mean, this is finally an administration who goes, wait, our military stockpile is at risk because we do not have the components in the supply chain to be able to make products. We're dependent upon products from other countries and assume that they're going to sell us those products so that we can have missiles to defend ourselves against them. That doesn't make any sense. So finally, we have people who are addressing the long-term problems, and I think the most important thing for our country right now is that we have the runway, because we cannot, in 3 years or 3.5 years, turn over the reins to another set of people who want to undo all of this, who hate the United States, who want to walk that back. We need people like President Trump, like the people he's developing, who understand the long-term issues that we face that have been built up over many years from this broken fiscal foundation from both parties. But that's where we are today, and he is doing the hard work to try to fix that. And it's not necessarily apparent to everyone who doesn't understand at this level, but it is so critical for this very important reset that we're going to have.
So I know that you're not a fan of tariffs. I'm not a fan of tariffs.
Correct.
However, the things that have been happening, the tariffs are not doing what everybody thought they would do. Why is that?
Well, I don't necessarily agree that they're not doing what people thought they would do. I think that there's been a bit of overhype on how things are presented. So do tariffs make it more expensive for businesses and consumers to buy certain goods and services? Yes, and that has happened, and I've seen that with my own eyes, with my own company and joint venture partners and other small businesses across the country. There are small businesses that have had major burdens. These are the things we thought would happen, and they are happening. In terms of creating runaway inflation, I don't think anybody said that at the levels they are. They said that when he kicked him up to 100%, which he walked back. But we also know when you look at inflation data that the way that that's calculated, there's a lot of picking and choosing and substitutions. So, of course, when you say, oh, well, if, this particular product is being hit too much, someone's going to substitute into this, of course, it's not going to show up in the same way in the numbers as it affects people in their day-to-day lives. So, again, I think it's that nuanced understanding. It's the same thing, when people said, hey, why am I at the grocery store and everything's 30% higher, and they're telling us inflation under Biden is at, 4%. We know that that has to do with the calculation. So I think that tariffs are causing some issues and some pain, and hopefully that can be sorted out in time. But, absent that particular strategy, I think other things that he's doing on the American front to shore up our security from an economic and national security standpoint make a lot of sense.
And Carol, I think a lot of people lose sight because it was just such a big issue. Look, trade is important, but it is also not a huge part of our economy. Am I right that it's, imported goods are about 10% of our economy? Does that the number sound about right?
It's a small percent. I would want to go back and verify the number because I have so many things rolling around my head today, and that's not one that's top of mind. But it's not a meaningful percent of our direct economy. But where it does impact is that there's componentry that then flows through the economy.
Right.
It affects domestic goods and services. So even if, on a headline basis, it doesn't seem like it's that important, it can flow through the rest of the economy and create a drag and create some issues there.
I want to take a break, and Carol, I want to come back. Carol Roth is the economist that I trust. She's a former investment banker and really has a clear eye on not Wall Street, but Main Street. I want to talk to you about the shutdown. We're about to start to see possible delays now at airports as our air traffic controllers. SNAP is about to expire. What happens here? When does the average person begin to really feel this shutdown? And is there a line where it just has gone too far? So, Carol, tell me where we are on the shutdown.
Well, it's tough, as I think I've said to you before, Glenn, as somebody who would love to see many parts of the government be shut down permanently.
Yep.
There's part of me that goes, this is fantastic, and I hope it goes on forever.
Me too.
Obviously, there are people who, we want to make sure get paid. We want to make sure the military gets paid. We want to make sure that air traffic controllers get paid. And so, there's a little bit of give and take. Probably the most surprising thing that has come to light is how many people are on food assistance in this country. When we have something that's supposed to be a safety net, it's almost, in my mind, supposed to be like under the tightrope, that trampoline under the tightrope, that net, right? It catches you if it falls, and then it pushes you back up, and it's a temporary solution. I feel like we've turned that net into a hammock where people are just taking a nap and sleeping in it long term. And, that is something that, even though devastating for the families who truly need to be on it, the fact that this is getting some light on it, I think, net could be a small silver lining here. And I think it's got to put pressure on the Democratic base. The Democrats are holding out for a bunch of insanity, for illegals over trying to feed the people who are actually in their base. So I'm hoping that puts enough pressure. For everybody else, though, I think when this really starts to flow through the economy and becomes a drag on numbers and becomes a drag on the stock market is where you're going to see a little bit more.
Any idea when that happens?
It's hard to say because, as we know right now with the government shutdown, we're not even getting numbers out on a regular basis. But we cannot afford for GDP to contract. We cannot afford for the consumer, which is 70% of the economy, to feel like they cannot spend because that flows through tax receipts. And if we have lower tax receipts, it's going to blow up the deficit. If we blow up the deficit, we can end up in a debt spiral.
Well,
so that's the big issue here.
The food stamps, if you look at the SNAP program through ethnicity, 45.6% of Afghans who have been imported here in America are on food stamps. 42% of the Somali community, 34% of the Iraqi community, and 23% of the Haitian community. That just can't happen. It just can't happen.
In terms of, those numbers, I think there's a common sense approach that we need to take here in terms of immigration, which, I've raised the question with AI, how much immigration do we actually need? But to the extent that we do invite great people into our country who share our values, we need to means test that, and you should not be allowed to come here and then be dependent on the government. That should be a condition of coming to this country. And I think that's something that seems like it would be an 80-20 or 90-10 issue.
Yes.
So, again, shining a light on these things at the point in time when we have people who are actually willing to do the hard work and address the problem is a net benefit, is a silver lining, even though the backdrop, we don't want people who actually need this to go without food. But, it brings into question the system. You can get people beans, you can get people rice, you can get people staples and have them be well fed at a fraction of the cost that it's currently costing, and keep out the sodas and the candies and the people who just arrived here to take advantage of the system.
Yeah, Carol, thank you as always. God
always
bless.
A pleasure.
You bet. Bye bye. Carol Roth. She is just I just love Carol. I mean, I looked for somebody like Carol for a long time that understood Wall Street, understand the banking, and then also understood Main Street. CarolRoth.com. You can find her at the website Carol Roth, or you can follow her on X at Carol J.S. Roth.